If it's Friday, off to the races and going for gold. New polling shows Vice President Harris narrowing the gap with some key voter groups in the race against former President Trump, as she picks up a key endorsement with just over 100 days till Election Day. Plus, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets with former President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, one day after the vice president told Netanyahu in a one-on-one that she's concerned about the scale of human suffering in Gaza. And a massive coordinated arson attack sabotages France's high-speed train network, derailing travel for more than 1 million passengers, hours before the Paris Olympics' historic opening ceremony. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake in Washington. At the end of a marathon week and the beginning of a sprint to Election Day, it looks completely different than it did a week ago. By pretty much all the metrics, the opening ceremony of the Kamala Harris presidential campaign, if you will, has been a gold medal success for Democrats. She racked up thousands of D-S.C delegates without any formal challenger emerging. From the Clintons to Clooney, big-name Democrats all got on board, culminating in a formal endorsement today from the most decorated pairs team in the Democratic Party, Barack and Michelle Obama, all packaged in this video from the Harris campaign.
I can't have this phone call without saying to my girl Kamala, I am proud of you. This is going to be historic.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
I just want to tell you the words you have spoken and the friendship that you have given over all these years mean more than I can express. So thank you both. It means so much. And we're going to have some fun with this too, aren't we?
President Biden's spot on the Democratic ticket divided Democrats for weeks. But as the dust settles from his decision to withdraw, it's looking exceedingly popular. A New York Times Seine poll had 88% of likely voters approving of his decision to drop out, including 93% of Democrats. Folks, apple pie and sunshine don't poll that well in 2024. Now, there's also fresh enthusiasm for the Harris ticket, including big crowds at her Wisconsin event on Tuesday, and tens of thousands of supporters joining Zoom calls from supporting groups that claim to have raised millions of dollars. As the money pours in, Harris-backing entities are hitting the airwaves with new ads looking to define their candidate. Here's an ad that looks to educate voters on Harris's background from a major PAC that was supporting President Biden.
She's the attorney general who stood up to the big banks to protect homeowners and won. The senator who fought to defend a woman's right to make her own medical decisions. As America turns the page, Kamala is ready.
But for all the excitement on the Harris side, it's important to note this is a very competitive presidential race, and Harris is starting from behind with not a lot of time left on the clock. That New York Times Seine poll had President Biden trailing former President Trump by 6 points earlier this month, and they now have the race essentially tied with Vice President Harris. And while Harris and her campaign look to define her to the public, Trump and his campaign are doing the exact same thing. The top pro-Trump super PAC put this ad out earlier this week, claiming, without any particular evidence, that she is the mastermind of the Biden administration.
Kamala knew Joe couldn't do the job, so she did it. Look what she got done. A border invasion, runaway inflation, the American dream dead. They created this mess. Kamala owns this failed record.
I'm joined now by the masterminds of our NBC News coverage of this presidential race on set here. Senior political editor Mark Murray joins me, and senior national political reporter John Allen. So, John, looking back at everything we've seen since Sunday, if I can use one more Olympics pun here, does the Harris campaign feel like they have stuck the landing so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's like 4 years compressed into a week, so yeah. The Olympics parallel is a pretty good one. Yeah, I think they do feel like they've stuck the landing, and they have in terms of uniting a Democratic Party very fast, right? Mm-hmm. There were concerns about Biden, not just, at the national level, but in the swing states among Democrats. There were, he didn't have like 90% of the party behind him. Mm-hmm. Now you're seeing that. You're seeing the excitement, the energy, the enthusiasm, the donations that had dried up for Biden, in part to get him to leave, are now flowing freely to Kamala Harris. So that part of it, they've been able to wrap up quickly. The question now is going to be, can they make that next distance? Because we went from a race that Joe Biden looked destined to lose to one that I think is, again, competitive in the way that you would expect after the last several election cycles.
Mark, what do you make of the popularity of the Biden decision to withdraw? Is this sort of a snapback to normal, or does this tell us something bigger about the state of politics on the Democratic Party?
Just thinks how unpopular Joe Biden was. I mean, we all know it wasn't kind of, Republicans saying we don't want him in the race. You'd expect that. But having 90% of Democrats saying, yes, we want our president out of the contest. And Garrett, I think that one way to look at kind of the euphoria the Democrats are having right now and the unity is that, yes, they are super excited, but a lot of it's also a reflection of just how bad the 3 weeks were after that debate performance. Arguably the 3 worst weeks the Democratic Party's had since Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump in 2016. And so they're super excited, but they're also probably super excited not to be in the position they were in right after that debate performance, which looked like a destined loss for the Democratic Party, losing the White House, losing Senate seats, and losing more House seats.
And I think if I could just jump in there, I think there were a lot of Democrats who were looking at Joe Biden before that 3 weeks, certainly after the debate, and even some before it, who were thinking to themselves they were going to have difficulty voting in good conscience for Joe Biden because they saw the things that we all saw and that they couldn't unsee. And Kamala Harris gets out there and they don't have those qualms, right? Like none of them are sitting there thinking to themselves, is she capable of doing this job? Is she competent? Is she, on the ball? Like, they all feel like she is.
Democrats are so excited, they are signing up on purpose for Zoom calls on beautiful summer evenings to hear from candidates. Talk about this kind of modern campaign that we're seeing here. Kamala Harris had no public events yesterday, but they are seeing huge success from these massive Zoom calls, John.
Well, it's really a hybrid, right? What they learned in 2020 is that they could do a lot more fundraising and they could do a lot more outreach via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, as we use here at NBC.
Oh, God.
But they can use those. They can use those tools in order to basically spare the most important asset in a campaign, which is the candidate's time, and which is everybody else's time. So you're going to see her out on the campaign trail, no doubt. She's good on stage. We saw that with her launch of her own presidential campaign. We saw that this week. She's capable of doing those sort of big events and getting the energy and enthusiasm. But also they learned in 2020 just how much money they could raise, just how much outreach, political outreach they could do by having a candidate do back-to-back-to-back Zoom calls, or if it's not her, it's the campaign manager. And so they're trying to integrate all of the tools of the last couple of election cycles together.
The modern work-from-home campaign. Mark, internally here, you are our arbiter on all things polling, so I'll ask you to pull back the curtain here a little bit, if you would. We've seen some national polling a little bit, basically nothing from the state level about the state of this race. What does the data that is available to us really tell us about where this campaign is right now?
Yeah, Garrett, beyond the fact that Harris is in a better position right now than Joe Biden was after that debate performance, when you look into the crosstabs, particularly that New York Times Siena College poll, which really strikes me is the gender gap that's playing out. And Harris having a humongous advantage among female voters, and Donald Trump having a big, if not even a bigger advantage among male voters. And then also the geographical breakdown, too. And I think this is going to be fascinating, and particularly once we start getting to see some of that really good state data that I hope is coming in the days and weeks ahead. But at least in the crosstabs of that New York Times Siena poll, where Harris is doing super well is out in the West and the Northeast. But not as well in the Midwest and the South. And so as we're kind of extrapolating, and with the caveat that there's some big margins of errors when you have those geographical breakdowns, but, does she play as well in the Wisconsins, the Michigans, and the Pennsylvanias as Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona? And we're going to have to wait and see. Joe Biden's path, even going into that debate, before that debate performance, he was going to have to pull that narrow Rust Belt trifecta to get to 270 electoral college votes. Does she have different paths? Does she even have a greater path to 270 electoral votes? And I think we're going to find out that answer soon.
One of the traditional ways in which a candidate might shore up a geographical weakness, John, would be picking a running mate from another part of the country. What do we know about the state of that search right now for Kamala Harris?
Well, we know they're talking about it a little more openly that it's going on, right? But everybody kind of knew that.
Right.
I think almost everybody I've spoken to has said that they believe she needs to pick a white man. Everybody can dissect why they think that, but that seems to be a balance that they are looking for. Obviously, she doesn't need somebody else to make history. She's got that asset working for her. But I think, as she goes through this, she's going to do, number one, who does the least harm. And number two, I think who she sends a message with their choice. There's all this talk about regional, state balance, putting North Carolina in play or whatever, or Arizona in play. I actually think what matters more is who is she signaling to the American public is the kind of person she thinks should be the next president of the United States if something should happen to her or if she should step aside. I think that's where you're going to end up. You can see some of these candidates, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, Mark Kelly, senator from Arizona, Roy Cooper, as he pronounces it, governor of North Carolina, Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, Gretchen Whitmer, governor of... They all have their own attributes, and all of them, any of them, if they get picked, will go through what we're seeing J.D. Vance go through on the Republican side right now, which is a super quick vet by the media and the opposing party.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot about any of these people very quickly. Mark, I'm going to give you a very quick last word here, but if you're the Harris campaign, are you looking at these polls that show you closing the gap but still very much behind, at least within the margin of error? Is that the cup is half full, the cup is half empty? Like, how should they look at what the data they've seen is right now?
They should be looking at the data that they've returned back to the political situation before that debate. Okay. I think that's kind of where we're back to having, do you have a 50-50? Is it 40-60, 60-40? But that is the situation right now. And Garrett, in our kind of polarized times, I've always kind of thought, we've always been in that 50-50, 60-40
type. A very narrow band.
Correct. And which would end up, what's going to end up deciding this race is probably the news environment, the events that end up happening 2, 3, 4 weeks before the election. So we've been talking about this chaotic, eventful last month. I think we're in store for another 3 months of that.
We're not even into hurricane season yet. There's a million things that could happen. All right, gentlemen, we got to leave it there. John Allen, Mark Murray, thank you both for coming in today. I didn't get the memo about business casual until I said. Next Friday, I'll be ready.
Lose the tie, Garrett.
All right. Now, Mar-a-Lago today, former President Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It was their first meeting since Trump left office. And during brief remarks to the press afterward, the former president touted his relationship with Netanyahu and repeated his claim, again without any proof, that if he were to return to the White House, the situation in the Middle East would, quote, work out very quickly. Now, that meeting comes after Netanyahu met separately yesterday with both President Biden and Vice President Harris. Speaking after that meeting, we got a glimpse into how Harris plans to navigate those issues, Israel-Hamas war, as the de facto Democratic nominee, walking a fine line between supporting Israel's right to defend itself and calling for a ceasefire and the end to humanitarian suffering in Gaza.
I've said it many times, but it bears repeating. Israel has a right to defend itself. The images of dead children and desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety, sometimes displaced for the second, third, or fourth time. We cannot look away in the face of these tragedies. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent. So to everyone who has been calling for a ceasefire, and to everyone who yearns for peace, I see you and I hear you. Let's get the deal done so we can get a ceasefire to end the war.
With me on set is NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell. And Andrea, it's striking to me that we didn't hear from the President of the United States after this meeting. We heard from the Vice President. Not a difference in policy, but certainly notable differences in tone. What do you make of those nuances?
Absolutely, you've got it. And that was the perfect part of her comments last night, because she was emphasizing the humanitarian disaster, the need to get the hostages home, the need to end the war, which is not the first emphasis of Netanyahu. That's not what he wanted to project. But he came here thinking he was going to have this great stage. And instead, unexpectedly, the President of the United States is standing down from the campaign. And now the likely Democratic standard bearer is going to be the Vice President. He's met her once in 2017 when she was a senator. But they don't have that relationship that he had with Joe Biden, which was of such long standing that there was a lot of friction built into it from a lot of disagreements.
You don't know anybody for 40 years and get along the whole time.
It's like actually, this wasn't a good marriage. This was a bad marriage, but they managed to keep it together. In any case, she puts the emphasis more on the humanitarian crisis. She has a lifelong commitment to Israel. As a little girl, she raised money for the state of Israel, the planting of trees. She's married to a Jewish man. They're observant. They follow the holidays. Doug Emhoff has been campaigning and making speeches all over the country for the past year about the scourge of anti-Semitism.
He's sort of the point person for the administration on that issue.
And it's deeply felt. So She has her street cred on all of that, but she puts a lot of emphasis, more than the administration did early on after some disastrous airstrikes in Gaza 3 weeks into the war. She was noting, true to her values, the devastation, the famine, and the need to get the hostages home. And the president has come around to that. Tony Blinken was there as well long before. But certainly that's not where Netanyahu is, and he keeps raising new obstacles on a deal that's on the table. In addition to which, Netanyahu comes to the White House. He's been trying to get this meeting for 3 years, Garrett, and he finally gets it, but he also has to attend a meeting with the American hostage families.
Right.
Who were already angry at him because they were invited to a, quote, intimate meeting with him Monday night at his hotel, and they discovered he had brought a lot of Israelis who were supporters of his on his plane, and they were dominating the meeting.
We had some of those families on this broadcast yesterday.
Right.
What do you make of the effort that the Prime Minister went to go down to Florida to meet with Donald Trump, who he'd not met with in person? What does that tell you about how he views the domestic political situation here in the United States? And what do you make of the theory that he'd rather be working on this issue with Donald Trump come next January than trying to find a ceasefire deal right now with Joe Biden?
You know, and as you've reported, they had their own, friction, their own moments. But clearly, he is more comfortable with Donald Trump. First of all, he prolonged his trip. He needed to be back. We were told that he had to be back by 8 o'clock tonight, Israeli time, Friday night, the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath. Instead, he's staying over until the Sabbath is over, another 24 hours, by that detour to Mar-a-Lago. He was supposed to leave Thursday night. And also praising him in his speech to the joint meeting, and his very hard right National Security Advisor, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the day of the speech announced that he was endorsing Donald Trump. Cabinet members in allied governments do not endorse opposition, candidates in the middle of a campaign.
A lot going on under the surface here. All politics is local. I appreciate you for breaking down the international to the local about how all of this is connected. Andrea Mitchell, we have to leave it there. Thank you. And coming up, Congressman Jim Clyburn joins me next with his view on the Democrats' sprint to November, what a black woman at the top of the ticket means for America. Plus, auditions are officially underway to be the next vice presidential nominee. And there's nothing Washington loves more than a parlor game. We'll make our bets coming up. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. According to the D-S.C rules, there is just one more day for any challenger to Vice President Harris to declare their intent to run for the nomination. Harris has gained endorsements not just from most of the delegates to next month's convention, but also most of the big names in her party, including, as we mentioned, perhaps the biggest names, Barack and Michelle Obama. Joining me now is a longtime leader of the Democratic Party, one of those big names, South Carolina Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn. And Congressman, I want to start on just this week that Vice President Harris has had. You obviously already endorsed her, but even before the president withdrew, you said that if it were to happen, the party should not try to work against her. Are you surprised at all that no one in the party has worked against her and that the Democratic Party has coalesced so quickly around her?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Just slightly surprised, but I think that most of the delegates are pretty much in touch with the history of our party. Most of these people have been around the Democratic Party for a long time. They know what happens if you have a wide open convention, as we have had before, what happened in 1968, 1972, 1980. All of those wide open conventions resulted in dramatic losses. Richard Nixon, we got out of 68 and 72. That's carried on in one state after 1972. So we needed to be able to come together quickly, coalesce behind a nominee, and I think that's what we're going to do with the vice president. She's been in the vice president office now for 3 years, 3.5 years. And before that, she was in the Senate. Before that, she was Attorney General of California. Before that, a prosecuting DA. She has a tremendous resume, one that lends itself well to being able to manage the business of this country famously, and she will do that because I think this country is going to elect her.
Do the last 3 years of that resume, her time as vice president, work for her or against her? I know you're very proud of the Biden administration record, but Republicans are absolutely going to try to hang elements of it around her neck going forward.
Well, I hope they will, because I think the American people are going to look at the record of the Biden-Harris administration and compare that to the proposals coming forth from the other side in their Project 2025. I've been saying to people all over, whatever your interest is, Social Security, Medicare, education, civic service, whatever it is, look up Project 2025 and then go to that section of those 900 pages and see what they are proposing for your interests. What do you mean doing away with the Department or Civil Service employment in this country, turning that over to one person so you do their bidding rather than the bidding of the American people? Sounds a little bit like Woodrow Wilson to me, and that is not what we want to have in our government.
Congressman, I'm curious what you make of the Harris campaign and this new video that they debuted. You hear a little bit of the change in tone, the nuance of language here. The vice president talks about freedom, defending personal freedom. It's a bit of a shift from the way the president talked about defending democracy. Is that the kind of change that matters? Do you think Americans would be more likely to be dialed in on concerns over their individual freedoms as opposed to the more abstract concept of defending democracy?
Well, that takes us back to the kind of basic language that we started using a long, long time ago. The freedom to vote, the freedom to choose, the freedom to go about your business. This is what it's all about. People understand that word freedom. They may have trouble trying to define what democracy really means. They understand individual freedoms, and that is a good way to relate to people.
You told USA Today earlier this week, quote, "We thought we were ready for that," meaning a woman to be president in 2016, and we weren't ready for that. I wonder, as we sit here in 2024, is the country ready now?
I certainly hope so. As a father of 3 daughters, I work every day trying to make sure I make this a better place for them to grow up in. Now, those daughters of mine are already grown. I do have a couple of grandchildren and a great-grand. And I want, I got 2 granddaughters and 1 great-granddaughter. I want them to have a country to grow up in much, much different from the one I grew up in.
I want to ask you, and someone with 2 daughters myself, believe me, I'm dialed into this issue too. I want to ask you about the ongoing Veep stakes here. The Harris campaign says they're actively vetting some folks. You've name-checked some of the governors here: Shapiro, Cupper, which I'm getting used to saying correctly, Waltz, as well as Secretary Buttigieg. That's about half the list that we have here right now. So I wonder what you make of that list and who you think complements her the best.
Well, you know, if you look at, you just mentioned some polling data as it relates to the Midwest. I think Waltz is great for that. If you look at it universally, you look at foreign service, Buttigieg is great for that. The last time I checked, I think he speaks 7 or 8 different languages. He is a tremendous cabinet secretary. He's developed relationships with governors on both sides of the aisle all over the country. He will do great there. Josh Shapiro, I like very much, know him very well. I know Waltz brings a lot to the table. Keller from the military side. But Waltz was the highest ranking, what they call it, the National Guard non-commissioned officer in the country. He has a tremendous background when it comes to the military. He is from what we call the Midwest. He will do what? She's got a great lineup from which to choose.
You're putting more names on the list, not taking them off here, Congressman. We're working backwards here. So let me ask you the question this way. What do you think should be the most important factor in how she makes this decision?
Chemistry.
Personal chemistry.
Absolutely. Who is he comfortable alongside of? Who, the vibes that come from that? That is very, very important. We already see the other side having some problems with chemistry. There is bad chemistry between Trump and Vance, and it's going to get worse.
As you're looking at this race and as you're peering across the border into North Carolina, do you think having Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket changes the map at all? We talked about the Midwest polling. You're a Southerner. Does she play better in North Carolina and in Georgia than perhaps President Biden did?
In both those states, I think so, simply because she energizes the young voters much more than Biden did. He was winning them single digits. She is now seems to be winning them by double digits. It's always best to lead by double digits than by digits.
That's the kind of political wisdom you only get from decades in Congress. Congressman Jim Clyburn, thank you so much for joining us on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, up next, the debate over debates. Vice President Harris accuses former President Trump of backpedaling as his campaign argues they won't commit to a debate until the Democrats commit to a nominee. The panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we said earlier, what began as a marathon general election season between Joe Biden and Donald Trump has quickly evolved into an all-out sprint for the new de facto nominee, Kamala Harris, with just over 100 days to make her pitch to voters. But it seems Donald Trump may want to try to slow things down a little bit when it comes to his participation in the next presidential debate. In a new statement, his campaign writes, quote, given the continued political chaos surrounding crooked Joe Biden and the Democrat Party, general election debate details cannot be finalized until Democrats formally decide on their nominee. Joining me now to break down what all that means for a truncated race is our panel. NBC senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor, Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino and an NBC News contributor, and Mark Short, the former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence. He is also an NBC News contributor. Sahil, the Trump campaign is somewhere between stalling and trolling here on this moving forward on a debate. What do you make? Is there a real political strategy here to drag things out a little bit, or is this just them kind of not exactly having a plan for this new nominee?
Well, I think the strategy is simple. Trump is only going to debate if he thinks it's going to be in his political interest. He's not going to do it because of tradition. He doesn't care about that. He's not going to do it because of pressure from pundits or whatever. He doesn't care about that. Every time he's debated, he's done it because he believes he has something to gain from it. 2016 primaries, he was down. He needed, or introing himself to the country, he had to debate. The 2024 primaries, he did not debate because he was so far ahead of his rivals. He didn't care about the criticism he got in the general elections in 2016 and 2020. He debated because he was behind. He had to. So I think he's going to feel this out, make that calculation as to whether this is going to be beneficial to him, whether it's going to be hurtful to him. He agreed to that historically early debate with Joe Biden because he calculated that Joe Biden was not going to handle it well. He was very right about that. But now you got Kamala Harris, a woman 19 years younger than him. That contrast is going to be very different.
Yeah, he might have been too right. And I want to play a little bit of how Pete Buttigieg has been trying to bait Donald Trump. We'll talk about that on the other side. Listen.
Tough talk is this guy's calling card, and now there's this extraordinary show of weakness. Of course, it shows that he's afraid. It shows that he knows if the two of them are on a stage together, it's not going to end well for him.
Mark, as someone who worked for a candidate who also tried to goad Donald Trump into debating, how effective do you think a strategy like that is to get him on stage with Kamala Harris?
I don't think Pete Buttigieg is probably the best voice for that argument. I think if
he did it on Fox News as opposed to on MSNBC?
No, actually, if he actually did his job as Secretary of Transportation, actually helped with the thousands of people that were stuck in Atlanta, as opposed to auditioning for vice president every day, it'd actually be helpful to the country. But at the end of the day, I think Donald Trump will end up debating. This is part of his game, and I think that he'll need to debate the Democrat nominee. It's just a matter of when.
Maria Teresa, what do you think the Kamala Harris campaign needs here? I mean, Donald Trump has complained about the debate being on ABC. He says he wants to move it to Fox. Should the Harris position be, we can do it on Newsmax if you want, like we'll do this wherever, whenever, or does she need to be more careful here as well?
Well, I think one of the things that what we saw when Newsom went up with DeSantis on Fox News, they had basically, from the conversation I had with the governor, they didn't play by the rules that they had set in advance. So there is no benefit for Harris to do that because Fox News breaks the rules. Everywhere else, I think, is actually an opportunity for them to have that conversation.
But if you're running for president of the United States, like, you can't run from Sean Hannity, right? I mean...
No, but I think it's a matter of, like, how can you... It's recognizing that once you go on Fox News, they are not going to play by the rules. And so I think she'll be, I mean, if you're asking me, is she going to be ready? Absolutely. Is she going to grow her base being on Fox News? I don't know. I think she is actually better well served going on YouTube and having debates on YouTube where she can actually grow her electoral base on young voters. Now, you are laughing because I actually think that because you have Kamala Harris right now, it's going to be easy bait for the far right. But what they did not anticipate was the fact that you have all these young voters that all of a sudden are completely in her camp. I'll give you an example. At Voto Latino, we were struggling to register voters. We're registering them right now at close to 7,000 people a day at the fastest clip that we've seen. We don't expect those clips until after Labor Day. They are liking the product that now the Democrats are selling.
Mark, you're champing at the bit to get in here, so I'll let you come in. What do you make of that argument? But also, I mean, the idea, the Trump campaign basically wasn't trying to actively win young votes so much as they were trying to suppress their interest in this race.
That's exactly right.
How do you think the Harris pick changes the game there? And
I think it's a dramatic change. I think the reality is the vast majority of America didn't like the Trump versus Biden matchup. They're tired of both of them. And so I think she's a fresh face. I think she's somebody who I think wears thin over time. It's why when she ran for president, she started out front and descended throughout the process. But she only has 100 days. I think it plays to her advantage tremendously. And I think that America was looking for a fresh face. I was laughing at the broadside of Fox as if mainstream media isn't biased. And I think Governor Newsom got exactly what he wanted out of that on a Sean Hannity show. The debate on Fox would be Bret Baier, Martha McCallum, I believe, is what they're talking about.
We see that in the Times Siena poll, by the way. It's in the data. Young voters and Hispanic voters are much more energized and excited about the Harris candidacy. However, the Harris campaign is telling anyone who will listen that this does not mean they're ahead. Do not mistake enthusiasm for being ahead. It's a dead heat at best, and she's probably down right now.
She's got to make her most important decision of this race very quickly here, picking a vice president. Sahel, you and I were talking about this among our Capitol Hill colleagues. We're just this close to people openly campaigning for the job. What do you make of the Mark Kellys of the world, other folks, you know, kind of really starting to put their cards on the table here that they want this gig?
Oh, they're openly campaigning. They're just doing it intelligently to not embarrass themselves while doing it. So, yes, on Capitol Hill, Mark Kelly is the one person we know is being vetted. He comes with certain advantages. There are a number of other governors who are being vetted who come with their own advantages. I think she's going to have to evaluate this on a few different dimensions. I would say 3 of them. One is the political path, who helps her get to 270 votes. She's from California. It might help to have someone who's proven in the Midwest there. That's an argument that's being made. The governing partner, maybe someone who has a skill set that can complement her own. And then the third is what you were talking to James Clyburn about, chemistry. Who does she like? Who does she trust? That calculus is entirely in her own mind. You had someone like Barack Obama with Joe Biden. Pick 2 of those things, the political path and the governing side.
I'll add a 4th. Mark, who does the Trump campaign least want to see on that ticket? Who makes them the most nervous?
I would probably say Shapiro, because I think that she needs to have somebody who is moderate. I think it balances her progressive tendencies, rated as even more liberal than Bernie Sanders in the Senate. But I think also having Pennsylvania is beneficial to them. And I think there's also a concern for some about the anti-Semitism in their party. And so having Josh Shapiro, I think, would be a rounding out for Kamala Harris.
It certainly makes that argument. Maria Teresa, do you want to weigh in on this here? How do you see this decision coming together?
I think that one of the things that we want to be able to see for her is not to walk into the same mistake that Hillary Clinton did, where she picked Senator Tim Kaine, who was really appealing on paper to moderate independent voters. That didn't bring her anybody. So it's this calculation of who's going to actually complement Kamala to bring other voters in, at minimum to actually neutralize others.
This is the whole electability trap of trying to figure out who your neighbor's going to like as opposed to the person who you like. Mark, on the question of vice presidents, what do you make of the storyline that's been out there? I myself am a skeptic of it. I'll just put that out there. About buyer's remorse within the Republican Party or within Trump world of J.D. Vance as the nominee on that side.
I'd probably be a skeptic on that, too. I think that he fits where Trump is, sort of in the populist appeal right now of the party. But, you know, look, Donald Trump is known for second-guessing decisions. That's always part of the dynamic around him. So I can't sit here and tell you that there isn't some of that. But I think that there's probably been a little too much made of that.
Sahil, give us a bit more of the pulse of Democrats, both on the Hill, nationally, the activist groups that you talk to. We heard it from Jim Clyburn just a minute ago. The vibe shift alone among Democrats seems to be completely different. Yeah. They don't have to sustain it forever, but they do have to sustain it for 100 days. How do you view that landscape right now?
I think generally the mood among Democrats has gone from dread to hope. It was really bad in the last few weeks of the Biden campaign. It felt like the wheels were coming off. They had a candidate who clearly they saw could not communicate and drive a message and, stood on stage with Trump looking like what we saw. Down the ballot, there's a feeling that Democrats now have a fighting chance. Their thinking is that they're going to continue running the races they were. They were trying to keep it local. The candidates on the Senate, they have to, especially in the red states, but also the candidates in the House, they're keeping it local, overperforming Biden. The Republican playbook changes entirely because they were tying every Democrat to Biden. Now they're trying to tie every Democrat to Kamala Harris, and they're going to pull from her 2020 campaign heavily. All the progressive positions she took, they're going to try to paint her as out of the mainstream.
I don't really have time to ask this, but Maria Teresa, because you're here, I feel like I have to. The polling data here shows a bit of optimism beyond what Sahil was just talking about. A 24-point advantage with likely Hispanic voters for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, when it was just a 1-point advantage for Joe Biden. Can she lock that in? Can she grow that? And how significant is that advantage going to be?
So I will tell you, we hosted an event at the Vice President's house yesterday. The enthusiasm of folks who dropped their bags on 24 hours to come and help organize, they are the top of the crop in the local areas, and they came out. It's because they're excited. And the difference between where Donald Trump is and where the Biden campaign was not, Donald Trump had his base energized to go out. We were not sure if independent and folks that were on the fence were going to come out for Kamala. They are now going from saying, I'm going to vote not only for Kamala, but I'm no longer considering third party. It's huge.
I'm glad there's still no political events at the Vice President's residence.
All right. We'll leave it there. I'm going to have to separate you two if we have you guys back on the same panel.
I'm fine.
All right, good. All right, Sahil, Maria Teresa, Mark, thank you all for coming in on a Friday afternoon. And up next, let the games begin. The Paris Olympics gets underway with a first-of-its-kind opening ceremony and an alarming attack on France's high-speed rail network, creating chaos for travelers there. We'll have the latest on the impact and the investigation next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The Paris Olympics are officially underway. The opening ceremony is taking place right now, and it's the first time ever the ceremony is not taking place inside a stadium, but rather along the Seine, with athletes from around the world traveling by boat, cheered on by tens of thousands of spectators lining the river's banks. Security for these Olympic Games is extremely tight, with more than 45,000 police officers and soldiers patrolling Paris. But just hours before today's opening ceremony, parts of France's high-speed rail network were paralyzed by what officials are calling a massive attack that damaged several facilities and services. For more on the opening ceremony and festivities, I'm joined by NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk in Paris. And for more on the attack on France's rail network, I'm joined by NBC News law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, who is not in Paris. Stephanie, talk to me about the security situation on the ground there right now.
Garrett, I have been to a lot of places for highly secured events, whether it be the Pope in New York or whatever it might be. I've never seen an operation quite like this. And in the center of this city, it is really the heart of Paris, and they have completely shut it down. All of the major streets. There is an enormous amount of law enforcement, military presence. Where we are right here is right by the Arc de Triomphe. There is a team set up with rifles and various cameras and things to keep an eye on the street below. It really is remarkable, and it has shut the city down. But what we've seen today is the opening ceremony float down the Seine without any incident so far.
Tom, the authorities, I understand, are describing this attack as an arson attack. What more do we know about what it involved, and do we have any indication of who was behind it?
Right, Garrett. So not only arson, basically the signal systems and some of the control systems for France's high-speed railway, the TGV, those were damaged as a result. I just showing the images.
Tom, I'm going to pause you for a second because we're having some difficulty with your microphone. And Stephanie, you get to do the fun stuff here. Tell me a little bit more about this opening ceremony, what we saw, what we expect to see this weekend.
Yeah, sure. You know, Garrett, this was an ambitious idea right out of the gate. To hold an opening ceremony outside of a stadium and on the Seine. And if you think about a stadium holds 79, 80,000 people. The idea was to get as many eyeballs live on the ground being able to watch this as possible. We have upwards of 300,000 spectators along the Seine. The other really great thing about it is that the artistic director has been able to involve these iconic places along the Seine that the floating parade has gone by as part of the show. There was one moment where it was there was a scene that played out in a building called the Conciergerie, which is actually where Marie Antoinette was held during the French Revolution. It was this wild scene with pyrotechnics and heavy metal band, and it's just really great the way they've incorporated the city into the opening ceremony. It's also what they have done with these games. And a lot of the venues are in places that people will recognize if they visited this city.
I'm excited to watch it tonight. Do we have Tom back now? All right, we're going to get Tom back here in just a second. Tom, tell me more again about what we know about who might or may not have been behind this attack today and what steps we're going to see taken to make sure there's no other significant disruption in these games. All right. Well, looks like we still are going to be without Tom for the remainder of this segment, so we're going to take a break. Stephanie, Tom, thank you both for your reporting, or your attempted reporting, Tom. And to remember, NBC Nightly News with anchor Lester Holt will be live from Paris tonight and all throughout these games. You can stream every moment of the 2024 Olympics and catch every medal on demand only on Peacock. All of this starts tonight with a primetime broadcast of the opening ceremony at 7:30 Eastern. We'll watch out for those heavy metal bands. And after the break, a bipartisan pair of state lawmakers will join me here on set with an inside look at how they're working to overcome polarization and usher in a new generation of leadership. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back, and with apologies to the folks on Capitol Hill, who I cover when I'm wearing one of my other hats here at NBC, it is silly season in Congress, and it has been for a long time. A time focused on political messaging bills and show votes, like the one we saw in the House yesterday, with lawmakers passing a resolution condemning Vice President Harris for failing to secure the southern border. But as folks on the Hill head back to their districts for the summer recess, and we wish them well, albeit with little to show for their work, a group of young state legislators are convening here in Washington for an annual summit aimed at developing strategies for bipartisan solutions back home. Joining me now are two of those lawmakers, Democratic State Representative Jasmine Clark of Georgia and Republican State Representative Michael Smith of Delaware. Representative Smith, we see a lot of partisanship in my day job on Capitol Hill. How much do you see the same kind of sentiments in the State House in Delaware?
I think you can see it a lot. I think a lot of the national politics is starting to penetrate locally. That's where I think each of us has our role to change that. And I appreciate Future Caucus always trying to convene us to level set that and push some bipartisan solutions into each state house.
Representative Clark, part of the reason you're here is that you guys have been recognized as people who've kind of broken through bipartisan and achieved things in a bipartisan way. You've found new techniques, new solutions. What are you learning at the state house level that works there? And please tell me what you think can be applied here at the federal level.
Well, I think that at the state level, there are a lot of opportunities to collaborate. And we actually want to work together. I know that probably sounds surprising to some people, but the truth, especially in Georgia, in our state house, we're so close to almost a 50-50 house that collaboration is almost required in order to get things done.
I was going to ask you about that, and I'm curious what you make of it in Delaware, because I've covered state houses at different points in my career, usually in supermajority states, supermajority Democrat or supermajority Republican, and sometimes those are even more dysfunctional than the more evenly divided state houses. What's your experience like in Delaware in that regard?
I would say you're absolutely correct in that regard. We're 2 seats away from a supermajority in Delaware, but I think I always use the 80-20 rule when you're in the minority, and I think everyone should govern from a place of the minority at some point in their career if they want to be a good legislator. But you have to be willing to give up 80 in order to get your priorities done, which was in that 20%. And so governing's different than campaigning, and people have to leave that at the door.
When you say the 80-20 here in Washington, people think you're talking about the age of our legislators. So we have the oldest Senate and the oldest House, I think, in history. The average age in the Senate, 64. The House, it's 58 years old. old. How important is it, do you think, to get younger voices in state legislative bodies like the ones you represent, but also here in Congress to be more effective? Jasmine, I'll start with you.
I think it's vital. And I think one of the things that we're seeing right now is this hunger of younger generations saying we want to see ourselves represented in government, at all levels of government. So some state houses across the country are a lot younger than what we see in Congress. But I also think there's an urge to have a younger Congress as well. And as we've seen this week, there's also an urge to have a younger executive branch.
Well, it certainly looks that way on the Democratic side of the aisle anyway. Michael, what do you make of that question here, and how do you encourage bright, capable, younger people to want to get involved in politics at a level where you're not getting rich and you're not getting famous?
No, I think it's important to show people the servant leadership side of things. Like, we're all called to do more for our communities. Is this a way that you can step up to do that? Yeah, we definitely need more young voices in our state government and definitely in our federal government. And that's a hard value proposition for people that do need to pay bills or take care of loved ones or whatever it may be. But you have to look at the greater good. What can you bring to the table? And I think there's always that constant clash, whether it's in corporate America or in government, of when is it time to go and let the next generation take over, or at least let them have a seat at the table.
And Representative Clark, you represent a border, or not a border state, a battleground state, so you get the bonus question here on a national political level. I'm curious what you are seeing in response to the change in the top of the Democratic ticket down in Georgia. I don't know if you heard my interview with Congressman Clyburn, but he certainly thinks Georgia has a chance to be much more competitive, much more likely to be in play for Democrats with this new ticket compared to the previous ticket.
Well, I will say there's definitely a lot of enthusiasm. I do feel like we got a jolt of energy, maybe a little caffeination going on the campaign trail. But either way, I do think that the recent news about Joe Biden endorsing VP Harris, I do think that that has definitely changed things. There's a new energy in the air in Georgia.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. State Representatives Jasmine Clark and Mike Smith from Georgia and Delaware, thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
And after troubleshooting some technical difficulties, I think Tom just took the microphone out and blew on it and put it back in. He's back now with the latest on this arson attack in Paris. Tom, let's pick up where we left off here. What more do we know about this attack?
Sure, Garrett. So it's our understanding at this point, based on U.S. law enforcement officials and French officials, that they think that this could be either a anarchist or extremist left group that could be responsible for. And you can see the damage it did to their network as far as the high-speed TGV network that went down as a result of these arson attacks, cutting of fiber optic cables, signal issues that occurred across that country. And because of the amount of damage that was done, it's making it difficult. I mean, it's a very large crime scene, and so they've got to go piece by piece. There have been some claims about foreign country involvement in this. We've seen nothing to corroborate that at this point, but I want to stress everything I just said. It is still really early in this investigation. I mean, think of all these different signals that were impacted where fires occurred, or lines that were cut, and the amount of cameras that need to be looked at, or evidence gathered from those scenes. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge. We saw earlier when you were speaking with Stephanie the physical presence that French police have. There have been 4 confirmed credible plots that have been interrupted just in the past 2 or 3 weeks, including 2 this week, according to the French Interior Minister. So that, I think, underscores the real potential for issues in France and just how serious they're taking it. Everything from more kind of ISIS to individuals associated with Russia that they've taken into custody. So they're definitely on guard for this, but they definitely had an issue today, and obviously we'll be tracking it closely.
It's the biggest event in the world right now. A lot of folks still coming and going. What's our sense of the knock-on effects? My understanding is a lot of this network of high-speed rail won't be back up until Monday.
That's exactly right. They think it's going to take the entire weekend to kind of piece things back together and get trains moving again. So that's going to be a challenge. You know, there's obviously most of the venues are in Paris or in the general area around Paris, but there are soccer stadiums that are located in other parts of France. So as far as people being able to get to those venues, that's going to be a challenge. Perhaps not so much the athletes, but the spectators. So that could be an issue. but we're really only talking about the first 2 days of a 2-week-plus event. So hopefully there's not too much of an impact here, Garrett. It's just something that we're going to have to watch, but obviously it continues to drain French law enforcement resources. They're focused on terrorism. They're focused on possible foreign-directed plots. And now they've got to worry about this rail system and actually doing an investigation to make sure this doesn't happen again.
All right, Tom, thank you for your reporting and your persistence in getting it to us. We appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, and we are back on Monday with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Yasmin Vesuvian in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.